In the 1970s, John Denver raised folk music to a higher level and moved many people to follow. If you give Elvis the 50s and the Beatles the 60s, I think you've got to give John Denver the 70s, his boss once said. His beautiful words, rising singing, and acoustic guitar sets were a nice break from the times. The music that made Denver stand out was stuff like Rocky Mountain High, Country Roads, and Sunshine on My Shoulder. Too many artists, though, have had their lives cut short, and it wasn't because of drink or drugs. It was a sad end to his life when the experimental plane he was flying crashed into the Pacific Ocean. Some people have argued about whether or not the crash was planned, but everyone in the country was shocked by his death. This is John Denver's quick rise and fall. Henry John Deutschendorf, Jr. Henry John Deutschendorf, Jr. was his birth name. He was born in Roswell, New Mexico on December 31st, 1943. He became interested in planes because his father was a pilot and flying teacher in the U.S. Air Force. Denver's father taught him how to fly when he was young, and he loved flying all his life. His family moved a lot in the late 1940s and early 1950s, going to Oklahoma, Arizona, Alabama, and Texas. It was hard on the boy. Getting safe in nature. Denver's grandma gave him a 1910 Gibson acoustic guitar for his 11th birthday. The guitar was the only thing that stayed the same during his rough childhood. Denver felt safe in the woods because he never knew where his house was. In an interview, he said, "When I was a kid, I didn't feel like I had many friends. My dad was in the Air Force. My friends and I used to move around a lot. I loved being outside in nature, so I would go to the desert, climb trees, or go to the mountains." From Frankfurt am Maine to Denver. Denver felt more at ease with the acoustic guitar by the time he got to college and began playing it at neighborhood events. He went to Texas Tech University, then called Texas Technical College, in 1961. Denver quit college to become successful in the music business. He went to Los Angeles in 1964. He started playing at Ledbetter's nightclub, which is where he met Randy Sparks, who started the group The New Christy Minstrels. Sparks warned him that having the last name Deutschendorf could hurt his chances at getting a job. From one trio to the next. He then changed his name to John Denver. So why Denver? Well, it turned out to be the city of his favorite state, Colorado. Colorado is where he and his family finally settled down. The state is also strongly linked to mountains and nature, which he liked talking about. As a stage name, the name worked well for him and was easy for people to remember. In 1965, Denver moved to New York City and beat out 250 other musicians to get a job with the Chad Mitchell Trio. But it wasn't until 1967 that he got his big break when he took over for Chad Mitchell. The trio of them were named Denver, Boise, and Johnson. Ann Martell will love this one. When we talk about trios, Denver wrote the song Leaving on a Jet Plane, which was sung by the folk group Peter, Paul, and Mary. The song became a hit, and Denver's popularity went through the roof. Executives in the music business wanted Denver. Denver had already left his band in 1969 to go after a single career. Rhymes and Reasons, his first record with RCA Records, came out in October of that year. He sang Leaving on a Jet Plane in his unique way on the record. Denver made and put out 6 records between the late 1960s and mid-1970s. 4 of them did well at the box office. He became famous with the songs Take Me Home, Country Roads, Rocky Mountain High, and Thank God I'm a Country Boy. The state song of Colorado is his song, Rocky Mountain High. Thoughts, prayers, and promises. Because Denver was so famous, he soon had sold-out shows at venues all over the United States. Around this time, he met Annie Martell after a show in Minnesota. She would become his wife. They got married, and his famous song, Annie's Song, was about her. He wrote the song in 10 minutes while sitting on a ski lift in Colorado after he and his partner fought. Poems, Prayers, and Promises was Denver's 4th studio album, which came out in 1971. His first to sell 1 million copies was Take Me Home, Country Roads. It was the first of many hits that would happen throughout the 1970s. High on the Rocky Mountains. Part of the song's success was due to the work of his new boss, Jerry Weintraub, who would later become a Hollywood director. Weintraub signed Denver in 1970 and demanded that the song be re-released and that a radio campaign begin in Denver, Colorado. From that point on, his career took off. In 1972, he had his first top 10 record, Rocky Mountain High. The title track made it to the top 10. As a singer, Denver had a lot of success between 1974 and 1975. He had 3 #1 albums and 4 #1 songs. He made John Denver's Greatest Hits, which became one of the best-selling records in RCA's history. There were more than 10 million sales. Blonde hair and big glasses. But even though John Denver was very famous, some people thought he was just a simple folk singer. Along with that, the artist had a style that most Americans might not have liked. In the 1970s, the long-haired singer wore granny glasses, and he looked good on stage. Images that are often linked with the American West were stitched on his clothes. Denver was on a lot of TV shows. The Rocky Mountain Christmas special, a holiday special he did, was seen by over 60 million people and was ABC's most popular show at the time. Denver stopped doing business with Weintraub in 1982 because the boss was busy with other projects. It was said that he threw Denver out of his office and even called him a Nazi. Another door opens when the first one shuts. Denver later wrote in his book, "I'd break my rules to do what he asked me. You sell your soul to the devil every time you break your morals, whether it's because you don't want to worry about it or because you're afraid of what you might lose if you do." Another door opens when the first one shuts. When Denver became a guest on The Muppet Show, he became friends with Jim Henson, and the two have been friends ever since. Denver was the host of the Grammy Awards 5 times and a guest host on The Tonight Show a few times in the 1970s and 1980s. A man who does things. Denver spoke out about politics in the middle of the 1970s. He helped start the Hunger Project in 1977. In his 1975 song Calypso, which is an ode to the research ship that Jacques Cousteau once used, he talked about caring for the earth. When he worked for Jimmy Carter in 1976, he became one of his best friends and partners. As the 1970s came to an end, he focused more on helping people in need, protecting wildlife and land, ending hunger, and helping NASA explore space. It looked like he knew he was done with music for good and needed to move on to bigger and better things. He stayed in Edina, Minnesota with his first wife, Annie Martell, from 1968 to 1971. The son they adopted is Zachary John Denver. Denver bought a house in Aspen, Colorado after Rocky Mountain High did well. That's where he lived until he died. They got a boy named Zachary John Denver and a girl named Anna Kate Denver. Denver once said, "Some guy's dad, I'm some girl's dad. When I die, Zachary John and Anna Kate's father, boy, that's enough for me to be remembered by." Denver wrote the song "A Baby Just Like You" about little Zachary, but it was actually for Frank Sinatra. A second short marriage. Denver and Martell were no longer together by 1982. He said that his work obligations kept them apart. Annie Martell said that they were too young and immature to handle his quick success, though. After they settled their property dispute, Denver is said to have become violent. He's said to have cut their bed in half with a chainsaw. After going out with Australian actress Cassandra Delaney for 2 years, Denver married her in 1988. They had a girl together named Jessie Bell and lived in Denver's house in Aspen. After 3 years, they were no longer together. They were no longer married by 1993. Denver remembered his marriage to Delaney this way: "For our short-lived marriage ended in divorce, she managed to make a fool of me from one end of the valley to the other." Relaxed with a record. Denver was a chill artist who made songs about mountains. But in the early 1990s, he got into some trouble with the law. A charge of drinking and driving was brought against him in 1993. He was then put on probation. He was charged again the next year while he was still on probation. This time, he was charged with minor driving while drunk after he crashed his Porsche into a tree in Aspen. The judge even put his case to a jury. On the second DUI charge in 1997, the jury couldn't decide what to do. A dangerous test ride. After that, the case was reviewed by prosecutors, but it was closed when Denver died in October 1997. After much thought, the FAA decided in 1996 that Denver could no longer fly an airplane. The choice was made because he failed to stay away from drinking. His death would be caused in large part by that. On October 12, 1997, Denver was getting some experience with an experimental plane he had just bought from a man in Santa Maria. That afternoon, he was practicing a few touch-and-go landings before flying over California's Monterey Bay. His test ride was his last, though. He was just 53 years old. Why did his plane go down? Before the half-hour mark, the plane went down into the water. When search and rescue teams got to the scene, they saw Denver floating near the plane's wreckage. He died right away because of the force of the crash, which was later proven. Even though it was clear that he had died, no one agreed on why. There were a lot of unanswered questions. There are a few things that led to the crash and Denver's death. The first problem was that Denver forgot to refill the plane. He didn't fill up. He might have thought there was enough fuel for a short spin, but the plane was built so that the pilot had to unbuckle and turn the whole thing around to change the secondary fuel tank valve. It looks like Denver said no to refueling because he planned to use autopilot to keep the plane level while he moved to turn the fuel switch valve. Experts think that he probably put his foot on the right rudder pedal at the same time, which made the plane turn lower. What he said last. A spokesman for the National Transportation Safety Board said Denver didn't broadcast any emergency signals when he made a normal radio call to the Monterey Airport Control Tower just seconds before the crash. Denver radioed the tower to let them know that he was making changes to his transponder. The transponder sends messages to the tower so that air traffic controllers can see the airplane on their screens. He was sending the transponder signal, said George Peterson, who worked for the safety board. Then he told them John Denver's last words, "Do you have it now?" So quick, so light, and so strange. By the time they saw it on screen, they had already tried to call Denver again, but his signal went out at 5:28 p.m. There were no signs of trouble. People who saw what happened said that Denver's plane was 500 feet above the water when it suddenly fell. Then it broke apart when it hit something 200 yards off Point Pinos. Veteran pilots of the same type of plane say that the crash could have been caused by several things because the plane is so fast, light, and different. In any way other than safe and effective. Several people said that the small plane would have lost its balance and crashed into the ground, and the front wing had come off. A long-time Long Easy pilot said Denver might not have noticed the plane going toward the water because he was too busy making sure his tracking systems were set up correctly. It turned out that Denver's test plane wasn't safe or reliable at all. Canard Aviators, a group of people who like to build their airplanes, said that between 1983 and 1996, 61 crashes involving the Long Easy type of plane had been reported to the safety board. Denver was flying one of these planes. Of those 61, 19 of them ended in death. Sticky stuff, fiberglass, and metal. Long Easy experts say that the plane isn't made by just one company. Instead, people buy plans for the plane and use styrofoam, fiberglass, and metal to build it together. It can move at almost 200 miles per hour thanks to its back engine and front wing. Most experts think that Denver bought the plane on the market for used planes. Later, it was found that Albert Bert Rutan designed Denver's plane. Rutan is best known for making the long-winged Voyager, which was the first plane to fly around the world without stopping to refuel. I'll be back soon. Denver may or may not have known any of this about the plane's history, but it was pretty clear that he planned to be back soon. He told people at the airport that he had had enough fuel for about an hour in the air before getting on his almost 10-year-old plane. It looked like he planned to come back in a short time because he left his Porsche in the parking lot with the top down. According to the Coast Guard, Denver's body was badly mangled. It was recognized by fingerprints that were already on file in Colorado. A person who loves airplanes. After that, a funeral was planned for Aspen. A lot of people in the country cried when they heard that John Denver had died. In a statement, President Clinton said, "His soaring music evoked the grandeur of our landscape and the simple warmth of human love." Denver's spokesman, Paul Schefrin, said the singer had been flying for more than 20 years and owned a Learjet as well as the Long Easy. Denver also had a two-seater high-performance Christian Eagle. At the Monterey Airport, it was in the garage. While under the influence. Denver was a fan, but his license to fly wasn't valid because he had a history of driving while drunk. Of course, he wasn't allowed to fly by law. Even though he had a history of drinking, medical records showed that he had not been drinking on the day of the crash. He wasn't drunk that day, but rumors were going around about what the flight was for. Most people think that Denver crashed the plane on purpose. Why? The idea is that he was very sad and wanted to find the best way to end his life. Giving something away. When the governor of Colorado heard that Denver had died, he ordered that all state flags be lowered to half-mast to honor and thank him for his work. A metal figure was also made by the state of Colorado and can be found at the Red Rocks Amphitheater. Aspen celebrates John Denver for a whole week on the anniversary of his death, with live music, tours of his home, and old radio shows. The Hall of Fame for Songwriters. Denver made a mark on the world. He had made and released about 300 songs by the time he died, and wrote 200 of them himself. He sold more than 33 million records around the world. He was made a member of the Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1996. It's too bad that Denver wasn't the only artist who died too soon in a plane crash.